I can only be great. I can only be great.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade, and today we'll be talking about Heartland Wrestling Association, the wrestling promotion that was run by Thatcher that operated as WWE Developmental between 2001 and 2002. So, before we really get into that, we have to talk about the owner and operator of Heartland Wrestling Association, Thatcher. So we're going to do a little bit of a background on Thatcher. So Thatcher, at 19 years old, went to be trained by Tony Santos in Boston, Massachusetts in February of 1960. He had his first match in July of 1960 in Maine. He became Les Thatcher from his actual birth name in 1962 in Indianapolis. So he was an active wrestler between 1960 and 1980. He became a commentator for Mid-Atlantic Wrestling during the 70s, which is the Crockett promotion. During the 70s, also worked by doing merchandising. So he did T-shirts, he did jackets. He actually worked in the WWF on 5 issues of the WWF magazine. This is where he met Vince McMahon, and so he had been around the business for a long time. In the early 90s, he actually ended up training at North Wrestling Federation, the NWF. After that fell apart, he moved back home to Cincinnati, where he began the Main Event Wrestling Camp in 1992, which is the school that was the underpinnings for the Heartland Wrestling Association. So Main Event Wrestling Camp was 3-day drills, and it lasted from 1992 to 2003. But it's most famous for being featured in MTV's I'm a Pro Wrestler. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, so I have to explain it. MTV used to do these documentaries, True Life. And this particular episode was about the past, present, and future of the wrestling business. The past was Tony Atlas. They showed how Tony Atlas was down on his luck, out here hustling, trying to make some money at a time where he wasn't really in demand. The present was, at the time, because this was to 1999, was Triple H in China, who of course were at the top of the WWF. And the future was supposed to be this guy named Matthew Taglia. So Matthew Taglia was a washout. He was essentially a really lazy student who never showed up. You know, he was Les Thatcher called him a pain in the ass. This is a kid who had dropped out of the police academy, the fireman's academy, and was essentially a drug addict who was living out of a hotel when he was supposed to be training with Les Thatcher. One of the more famous scenes is when Les Thatcher actually found the kid's crack pipe and kind of confronted him about this during the show. It was absolutely bizarre to see. It was pretty famous. Also, the Main Event Wrestling Camp and Heartland Wrestling Association became really famous for running the Brian Pillman shows, which they ran between 1998 and 2001. They ran 4 different Brian Pillman benefit shows for his family. Les Thatcher has said that over those 4 years, they raised $120,000 for the Brian Pillman's family. They began in April of 1998 and ended in August of 2001. During this time, there was plenty. This was one of the few, pretty much the only time, I believe, where you got WCW, WWF, and ECW talent all under one roof. And he was very proud of the fact that these companies trusted him in order to do that, and that they were willing to donate time, donate money to the Brian Pillman family. But each one was a little bit different. According to Les Thatcher, there was only supposed to be one, that he never considered that he was going to do 4 of them. There's only supposed to be one of these things. And he had the cream of the crop on him. So it was very important. The very last one took place because of issues with some of the volunteers who had left, so he wasn't able to do anymore. Also, there were some issues with Melanie Pillman, the ex-wife of Brian Pillman, where there were some people who let's just say, in order to be nice, people didn't like her very much. So they weren't really interested. But this had pretty much brought Heartland Wrestling Association to the forefront. And, you know, there were some very important things that happened there. Mark Curtis, who Brian Hildebrand, who ended up dying of cancer in 1999. One of the final times he had refereed a match was at one of the Brian Pillman shows. Dean Malenko actually announced his retirement at the Brian Pillman 2001 show. So there were some really big moments in addition to the huge Benoit William Regal match at the Brian Pillman 2000 show, which is, tremendous. So those shows really showed that Les Thatcher knew how to book a show, how to put things together, and it really elevated Heartland Wrestling Association. So the relationship with the WWF goes back to 1998, where Les Thatcher gets a phone call from Bruce Pritchard. Bruce Pritchard flies into Cincinnati. He has a sit down with Les. They talk out the terms of a contract. Bruce goes back to Stanford. A paper contract never shows up. So Gary Juster, who works in WCW, puts him in contact with J.J. Dillon. They want to sign him on to do developmental for WCW. Because the WWF never really got back to him, he ends up signing a developmental deal with WCW. And he becomes WCW Developmental in 1998. So WCW starts having financial problems. Of course, they're near the point of going out of business. And the contract is actually canceled. So he gets a phone call from Jim Ross, who is reiterating WWF's desire for a developmental program. This is around the time when they're about to close Memphis. So he's waiting. He has a conversation with Jim Ross, and he said he didn't really want to live in Stanford, so he couldn't accept the offer. Plus, besides, he had some other things going on. But a deal was made in 2001. So during the time of its WWE developmental days, Les Thatcher was the head trainer, but there was a Dave Taylor, former wrestler for WCW, was also a trainer there, and so was Dean Malenko. And some of the alumni that came through Heartland Wrestling Association over the years, of course, again, not going to try to say when guys were where, because it'd be very difficult to do that. But Lance Cade, John Cena, John Moxley, Victoria/Tara, Nigel McGuinness, Charlie and Russ Haas, Jamie Noble, Elix Skipper, Kaz Hayashi, Shark Boy, L.A. Knight, Carl Anderson had all gone through Heartland Wrestling Association. Due to how close Heartland was with Ohio Valley Wrestling, there was a lot of talent trading between the two. They also helped each other with taping. They also helped each other train, and had a very good relationship in the later part of the Heartland Wrestling Association contract with the WWF. Jim Cornette would actually come in to help, and he actually worked commentary for some of their TV tapings. So OVW and Heartland Wrestling Association were very, very close together. And it was unfortunate when WWF started to restructure in 2001 as it was preparing to go really corporate. The budget was slashed. And when the budget was cut, Heartland Wrestling Association ended up losing the contract to the WWF. On December 15th, 2001, Russ Haas, the brother of Charlie Haas, had a heart attack while working for Heartland Wrestling Association. He was not active at the time. He had already had a heart condition. And he ended up dying. And so it was a very bad time in 2001, a very stressful time for Les Thatcher. And in 2002, the end of the developmental contract. So Les thought to do some small-time camps with Harley Race and Ricky Steamboat, which they called them super camps. They also wrote a book, the three of them, on training wrestlers. And since he had been training for 10 years, he had decided that, enough was enough. And he decided to get out of the business. I believe he sold it in 2005. So Les Thatcher got essentially out of the business, but there are still plenty of DVDs out there so you can watch the Heartland Wrestling Association. Another little tidbit is that AJ Styles was actually, when he was offered a WWE developmental contract, he was going to be sent to Heartland Wrestling Association, but he turned it down. He didn't want to leave his family, who lived in Georgia at the time. So the legacy of the Heartland Wrestling Association is that, for a while, it was known as one of the top independent wrestling promotions in the country. It worked as WWE developmental. It was pretty popular when it was during the developmental days and afterwards. So the legacy of Heartland Wrestling Association is pretty good. And even though it's not talked about on the same level as OVW, it was a great sister promotion to OVW. And then they did a lot of talent trading, like I said before, and it was very close to OVW. So the 1-2 punch of those two turned out to be pretty good. All right, like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, and I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session where you got an affection for no progression, regression. The best.